Morena Koto, welcome to the masterclass. Thank you for bearing with us while we had a minor technological meltdown in the background, which is all sorted now. It's wonderful to welcome you all. Ko Kate Wilson-Butler, toku ingoa. I'm Head of Climate Action at SBC, and I have the privilege to work alongside a very talented team of people who are supporting the Climate Leaders Coalition. We're really excited today to be presenting the 4th annual snapshot of the Climate Leaders Coalition and doing a bit of a deep dive into some of the key findings that the data has provided to us. So before we leap into it, a little bit about why we produce the snapshot and what it means to the Climate Leaders Coalition. All of you are probably signatories of the Climate Leaders Coalition or know a bit about the organisation, but the accountability through collective transparency is a really key pillar of the coalition's activity. Collectively reporting on how we're tracking against some of those commitments that we've made and holding one another to account for that progress is really important to the coalition's credibility, and it also provides a really key leverage point when the coalition goes out and advocates to government, for example, for faster and bolder climate action. The annual snapshot is the key tool that creates that collective transparency and the accountability and the credibility that creates. So the 2022 snapshot will actually be the last report that is produced against the 2019 Statement of Ambition. From 2023, the coalition will be collectively reporting against the new Statement of Ambition. We're really lucky to be joined for today's masterclass by the wonderful Barbara Nabel of ThinkStep ANZ, who supported us with the analysis that has produced this snapshot and analysed all of the data that you so kindly provided to us. So Barbara will speak to some of that analysis and the key findings shortly. We'll also then have Rachel Cox, our Climate Leaders Coalition comms lead, who will talk a little bit about some of the key findings and the key stories that that the data that you provided to us showed us, and how we weave that into a narrative which was released this morning. And also we'll talk a little bit about the Climate Leaders Coalition work program over the next year. We'll also then hear from SBC's own Megan Gallagher, who many of you will know and who worked very closely on the new Statement of Ambition and the process to develop that, who will talk a little bit about that new Statement of Ambition, those of the signatories who have opted to be first adopters of that new Statement of Ambition, and also what the look ahead to September 2023, when the full requirements of the new Statement of Ambition will need to be met, and where some of those points are where we see that we will need to work alongside signatories to support you to meet that new Statement of Ambition. So before I hand over to Barbara, a few little bits of housekeeping. Please, if you can, turn your cameras on. We are very keen for this to be an interactive session and a discussion with all of you as much as anything else. So please, if you feel comfortable doing so, pop your camera on. The presenters will talk for about 30 minutes all up, and then we'll dedicate the second half, or perhaps we'll try and condense it since we lost 10 minutes to a technological meltdown, and we'll dedicate a good chunk of the time to questions and answers. If you do have questions, feel free to put your hand up and speak to that question, or if you'd rather put it in the chat, please do that and we'll read it out for you. So I'll pass now, without further ado, to Barbara, who many of you will know. So Barbara is the ThinkStep CEO, ThinkStep ANZ CEO, and her passion is to enable organisations to succeed sustainably, and we are very lucky that that includes Climate Leaders Coalition. So she does a great job in her role as a translator between sustainability and traditional business language, and we're very grateful to have her translation skills at the helm with this analysis. So welcome, Barbara, and I'll pass to you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for the very warm welcome. Kia ora, everyone out there. And I'd like to start with a big congratulations for getting all the data in, and also for significant emissions reductions that have been achieved. So I think that everyone who has been working on that and is still working on reducing really does deserve a big congratulations and thank you. Because without the data, without everyone doing their bit, we wouldn't get there. Even if it is a small contribution that everyone makes, that really does count. Quite often I get the comment, oh, but in New Zealand we really are a really small percentage of worldwide emissions. But Compare it to going to vote. Everyone goes, not everyone, but a lot of people do go and vote when we have a government election, and every single vote does count. So every little bit of carbon that everyone can save does count in the same way. So even those that might not have contributed to the overall excellent result of 8% reduction still does contribute. So everyone really does deserve thank you. Overall, 57 signatories have reduced their emissions, and that is through less land and air travel, reduced fleet sizes, but also the move to EVs, improved energy efficiency, use of renewable electricity. So all those aspects have contributed to that 8% reduction in scope 1 and 2. And 11% reduction for those who have reported already over the last 4 years. So there really is a very significant trend that we can see. If we move to the next slide, we can see that reducing is good, but reducing it against a significant target shows you how much we actually have to do. And that is why we do like the Science-Based Target Initiative's target, even though if not everyone needs to have a verified target. 22% do have a verified target, and further 60 are following the Science-Based Target Initiative guidance. And what that guidance does is it doesn't tell you how much we can reduce and set a target against that, but how much we have to reduce to achieve the Paris goal. And those 63% who have a 1.5 degree target will really make a difference, because 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees has significant implications. There are a few who currently are not following the guidance or haven't set a verified target, which is not a requirement, just to clarify that. But they are working on setting a target in line with science, so following the Science-Based Target Initiatives. And setting the target being step 1, 95% of signatories are considering targets in their actual business planning cycles. And that is where that translation piece comes in. If we don't plan our businesses around the reduction, that's not going to happen. So the two really do need to go hand in hand. And we can see that that is happening here in the with the signatories. So supporting suppliers, and 98% are supporting their suppliers to reduce emissions. And that is really very, very key, because those supplier engagement discussions are all around scope 3. I often get the question, well, but scope 3, that's a bit of double counting, because my scope 1 and 2 is your scope 3. But I always describe looking at scope 3 emissions as joint ownership. It's two organizations owning the same emissions. And only if the two co-owners of those emissions work together, we can reduce them. And that is why supporting suppliers is so important. And that includes initiatives like procuring renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, but also setting criteria and procurement policies. And what is really important here is, yes, set the criteria and procurement policies, but then work with the suppliers rather than going, oh, you don't meet the targets, I'll work with someone else. It does need that collaboration and supporting them. And another really important aspect that when we put that pledge together was, we also need to support employees, because every person also in their life outside of work have emissions. So by, for example, allowing flexible working or providing facilities to encourage active transport, That is not only reducing the employee commuting emissions, one of the Scope 3 categories, but it actually might also help with a healthier lifestyle. So there is a lot of co-benefit as well in supporting employees reducing their emissions. And almost everyone is doing that. There is some research coming out soon looking at how much do we actually reduce emissions by just allowing one day working from home. So we'll share that when it comes out. After reducing as much as we can, we do also need to adapt and be ready for some of those climate change caused risks, or even financial risks, and that is where the task force for the climate-related financial disclosures is coming in as a preferred approach. And over half of the signatories are already assessing and disclosing those climate change related risks. And the reason that TCFD probably is the preferred approach is not only that it'll be mandatory for listed companies and financial institutions, but it's a really useful framework because it looks at setting metrics and requires having the governance in place as well. So to actually make sure it can happen. So those not using it, I'd encourage you to have a look at it. And now looking at what have companies done to reduce, and that is supply chain emissions, or Scope 3. It's within the organization, it's moving fleets to EVs, it's improving energy efficiency, reducing waste, but also looking at technology to monitor emissions. And there was a piece of work recently, a couple of weeks ago actually, launched by Spark, looking at how can technology help reducing emissions. And there is significant opportunity in that as well. It's 42% of what we do need to do as a country can actually be supported by technology. So good to see here that companies are already using that. And some of the barriers would be dependence on suppliers, lack of resources, but also we are still waiting for technologies. And lastly, I want to briefly talk about the commitment of businesses investing in carbon reduction. And almost all of the signatories have reviewed or increased their commitment to an overall budget of 9.5 billion. Just imagine what we can do with 9.5 billion over the next 5 years to reduce emissions across all the signatories in New Zealand. So I think that's a very positive outlook, and I'll hand over back to Kate.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a wonderful whistle-stop tour of the key stats and figures from the Snapshot Report, and all of you will have seen the materials which were released from Embargo this morning. And I think some really interesting takeouts there. One question on the TCFD point that came through as we're preparing the materials was why TCFD and why not XRB? And obviously the XRB's framework on climate-related financial disclosures is being developed as we speak and will be released very soon. I think next year we'll see many signatories as reporting entities under that framework, and many may indeed voluntarily report in alignment with their framework, which will be based on very closely, but a kind of an Aotearoa New Zealand specific version of that framework. So it'll be interesting to see how that's reflected in next year's snapshot. So I will pass next to the wonderful Rachel Cox, who leads on communications for the Climate Leaders Coalition. And Rachel will talk to us a little bit about some of the highlights from this year, and also talk to us about some of the key messages coming from this year's snapshot. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Kate. Yeah, look, it's been a really big year for the coalition this year. So a really major milestone was launching the new Statement of Ambition in June. Pretty much the origins of the coalition was that we wanted to show collective business action on climate change, and we didn't want to just say, look, climate change is important. We actually wanted to have a statement and show that signatories were actually doing something about it. So with the Snapshot Report, we've got the traffic light table at the back, and we show signatory progress, and it's Sunlight's a very powerful tool about how we're each going. So this is actually the third statement. Every time we do it, it gets harder. So the 2017 statement reflected the science and policy at the time, and then the 2019 statement built on that. And then this year's one builds on that as well. And it really future-proofs the coalition and reflects the latest science and policy, but also ensures that, you know, we're continuing to push signatories to go further and faster in their climate action. So a big part of the focus for next year, which Megan will touch on, is around actually supporting signatories to meet that. It's also been a really, really busy year on the advocacy side. So this year we've had the government's first emissions reduction plan. SBC and the coalition put in joint submissions, and we're really pleased that 12 of the 14 key priorities that we lobbied for got picked up in the first ERP. The same with the National Adaptation Plan. So there was a huge amount of work to get a joint submission which reflected SBC members, but also our 93 coalition signatories. And looking ahead to next year with the election, advocacy is again going to be a really key thing for the coalition, because it's really important that no matter who gets into government next year, that there continues to be certainty for businesses to invest and innovate to help drive New Zealand towards its 2050 goals. To support signatories, because we've got so much talent within our 93 signatories at the people level. We launched a mentoring program this year. So in our first round, we had about a dozen matches. It's really fun for us because we get to play matchmaker. And so we're trying to put signatories that need a bit of a hand in a particular area with signatories that are a bit of an expert or doing really well in a particular area. So that's I really encourage signatories to sign up to that. We're aiming to do expressions of interest twice a year. We've actually just had another expression of interest, and we've had 40 people put their hands up to either be a mentor or a mentee. And just bear with us. We are working through that at the moment, but what we've found is we want to make sure that we're not just matching people with skills and experience, but also that we're matching people that we think are going to get on quite well and have quite a good relationship. So we hope to match make you guys that have put your names forward in the next week or two. Another big thing for us this year has been launching these masterclasses, which you're sitting in one now. So the reason, the kind of origin for the masterclasses is that COVID meant that for the last couple of years, as a membership organisation, we haven't been able to do networking, which is a key part of being a membership organisation. So it's been great to have a monthly masterclass, and typically we've been getting signatories to lead out on their particular area of expertise. So we've had some really great sessions on just transition and adaptation and climate storytelling and TCFD, and we're currently designing next year's program. So please let us know if there's things that you'd like to see a masterclass on, or if there's particular things where you think you could actually contribute or lead one. Let us know, because we're working on that program at the moment. Just the last big thing for the year is SBC and CLC's adaptation working group. So adaptation is very much an emerging area, and we want to increase business capability around adaptation. So that's been a fantastic initiative which 17 signatories are involved in. IAG co-chairs it. There's been some great work to actually design a definition of what is business adaptation, and over the next year we'll continue to drive that work program to really increase capability and understanding about business adaptation, because that's clearly, well, we've got to reduce our emissions, climate change is here, and making sure we future-proof our businesses to cope with it is really important. Moving on to probably the thing that I really enjoy, and I'm in a very privileged position as the comms lead, where I kind of get to have a bit of a bird's eye view of what's going on across our signatories. And what we know from a lot of the research is that New Zealanders want to see businesses act on climate change, but they don't really, they know it's important, but they don't really actually understand what is climate action. So we are pretty relentless, especially through our social media channels and website, about making it really practical for people and talking about the things that signatories are doing, which is making a difference, especially in mitigation. So from my point of view, doing a bit of a stock take from both the surveys that you all put in, which Think Step analysed, but also all of the kind of media reporting. These were kind of my key themes that I noticed from the year. So the first is sustainable finance. So we're very fortunate in the coalition. We've got the big 4 banks, and all of them have done a lot of work in sustainable finance products over the past year. So particularly in sustainability linked loans. If you're not familiar with the concept, it basically ties lower interest rates to achieving on sustainability targets. There's been a lot of really big initiatives with other signatories to launch sustainability linked loans. There's also been some really great products launched by banks to help consumers reduce their emissions. So we've got now a lot of loans for a household that wants to buy an EV or wants to put in more pink bats or double blaze or put in a more efficient heat pump. So there's lots of work in that space, and the same with farmers. There's quite a few farm specific sustainable finance products emerging. So the other thing in the sustainable finance space is KPMG, who's one of our signatories, a couple of weeks ago put out a really great report, which is kind of a really good summary of where the sustainable finance market is at in New Zealand at the moment. So if you're interested in that, it's on our website, and go and have a read. The next theme that there's been some quite cool stuff in this year has been zero carbon products. So this really responds to consumer demand, that consumers like wanting to know that a product might be fair trade or organic, knowing that it's low carbon is becoming increasingly important. So some of the really big signatory announcements this year is Silver Fern Farms launched their zero carbon beef products in the US, and there's been some news from Silver Fern Farms in the last week or two around looking to expand that to lamb and venison as well. We've also had the likes of Zespri doing some trials around some of their kiwi fruit products. We've got New Zealand Post that's doing carbon neutral postal services, and Toito Envirocare has also launched a climate positive certification, and they helped Emma Lewisham, which is a very luxury beauty brand, which I wish I could afford, to become the world's first climate positive beauty brand. So there's some really great stuff in that space. Another one is decarbonising process heat. So this one is particularly relevant for our agricultural signatories, and it's really what it basically means is transitioning coal-fired boilers to other things, whether that's wood chips or biomass or heat pumps. A lot of this investment is co-funded with ECA, which was another thing that the coalition really and SVC have really lobbied for increased investment on that, because while the problem with some of these investments is they're really expensive things to do. So what the co-funding has allowed is it's allowed some of our signatories to decommission their old coal-fired boilers and make the transition sooner to cleaner alternatives. So there's been a lot of great stuff in that space this year, and that will continue. Another one is around agricultural innovation. So there's been some really fantastic stuff this year, and hopefully through the joint initiative that came out of the budget for more public and private sector investment into really boosting R&D, we'll see more of this stuff. But we've had LIC has done some fantastic work to breed more heat tolerant cows, and also more climate cows that produce less nitrogen. And we've also had a lot of news this year, and I think it was maybe it kind of shows the beauty of naming something that media latch onto, but Fonterra's cow butcher prebiotic, and media have really latched onto this year with the early trials showing that it's got promising reductions in the amount of methane that cows produce. And the last one I just wanted to mention was electric vehicles. So all of our signatories, whether they're really tiny ones or our really big ones, have pretty much everyone's done something in EVs, whether that's an EV forklift or an EV rideshare program. But then some of our bigger signatories have been really fortunate to have some world-leading EVs. So Ngāi Tahu is working on an EV jet boat for the Shotover Jet. And this week, congratulations to Sparky, which is Ports of Auckland's e-tug. It was named one of Time Magazine's best inventions for 2022. So there's a lot of really fantastic stuff continuing to happen in the EV space. So keep it up, and please, my final plea before I hand over to Megan, as a coalition, we exist to serve you and to promote business action on climate change, but we only know what we know. So please tell us what you're up to, because we love to promote it. And we do pick it up through our newswire services, some of it, but there's lots of things that we may miss. So please just continue to tell us, because we want to get your climate action out there. It's really important. Cool, that's me. I'll hand over to Megan.
Thank you, Rachel. And just a massive acknowledgement of all of the hard work that you've done to support not only the report, but a lot of things that are happening in the background in terms of the Masterclass series, as well as the mentoring program. I think comms lead is probably not a sufficient title for the level of involvement you have and what's needed to be done for CLC. So thank you. Awesome. Wow, early adopters. I feel like this is such an exciting point for us to have gotten to when we started developing a new statement multiple months ago now. And it feels like it's a real moment to celebrate some of those key themes that Rachel has talked about, but also the level of ambition that was agreed on by this collective group and has set the foundation for these early adopters to meet is something to really acknowledge. We have had Mike Burrell, our ED, attend some global conferences recently, and there was a lot of praise that he received for the work of CLC, for the advocacy work that happens that Kate mentioned, but also for the new statement and the level, I guess, of raising of ambition that everyone has signed up for. That's being recognised globally is really exciting, and I think a credit to the resetting of what climate leadership is for us as a collective. So that's awesome. A special mention definitely goes to the early adopters that you can see on the screen. Whilst the minimum requirements fit into 4 bullet points, they are really no easy feat. So we just want to acknowledge all of the hard mahi that these organisations have made to be early adopters. And it's really heartening to see the mix of organisations that are on the screen as well. Not only the mix of industry, but the mix of size too. It really shows that everyone is playing their part for the transition to that low emission future that we all have in mind. While the 3 pillars of the new statement, mitigation, adaptation, and transition, are really significant, we've seen through the survey that you've completed a number of different things happening. One being that signatories aren't just settling for completing a requirement if they've been with us a while, sort of like the engaging with suppliers, that it doesn't remain the same response year on year, which is really heartening, that you're sort of challenging yourself to level up year on year, and that actually in doing that, others see you do that and then challenge themselves. So it's sort of like this cycle of ambition that you're engaging, which you may not see, but we see when we look at the survey responses. That's fabulous. And we've also started to see for signatories that have been part of CLC for a while, a fine-tuning around focusing and investing in spaces where they can have the greatest impact. So what that space of handprint, that's becoming quite a common theme we hear about, we're seeing that in the survey. Particularly for consultancies. So we're seeing them work as hard as they can to minimise their emissions internally, and then really putting a lot of resource and energy into engaging with clients and customers, which you may be aware is sort of a requirement for that 2-year period. So not a minimum requirement for the statement, but will be after 2 years of sign up. So it's great to see that ambition coming through as well. And the other piece to acknowledge for these early adopters is that one of the really tricky parts that we've seen is significant work that they've had to do internally to meet the requirement around assessing and disclosing risk. So kudos to all of these organisations for their work to do that, and heartening to see for those who aren't quite able to meet that yet, that some of these early adopters, when they completed the survey, weren't meeting that requirement, but in the space of time that it's taken from the survey to the report being released, they have been able to make that transition and to meet it. So that is, I guess, an acknowledgement of the hard work, but also of the ability for others to follow in the footsteps for them. So if we look at the next slide around where to next, As Rachel has said, there's a number of really awesome tools that we are curating for signatories to support with the transition to the new statement. And that we will focus them based on the survey insights and the key areas where we see, I guess, the biggest gap or the biggest opportunities for us to support to ensure that signatories can transition over. And you will have noticed from Barbara's information that that is around assessing and disclosing climate risk. And it's also in that space of having targets that align with 1.5 degrees of warming. So we will make sure that we spend time, especially time prior to September 2023, when we need everyone to transition over, focused on those spaces. We will also update the guidance document. I would really encourage everyone to look at the guidance document if you're focused on a specific requirement and needing some extra insight. It's a very, very rich resource and tool that a lot of signatories have supported the development of. And we will look sort of May next year to be able to update that as leadership progresses, to make sure that we're informing you of what best practice is in each of the requirements. So keep an eye out for that. And then the other exciting thing of having our early adopters in there is that we now have some really good examples of different industries, different size organization meeting these minimum requirements. And so we'll pull together those examples and be able to share them out with you as well, so that you can have a look at what has met the bar and see how you can use that to inform the progress that your organization is making as well. So yeah, just a massive thank you to everyone for all the work that they've done, not just to the 35 early adopters, but to everyone that was involved in the ambition of setting a new statement. It is so wonderful to see it come to fruition. In terms of progress, if you're wanting to transition to the new statement prior to September 2023, you absolutely can. We'll be reviewing applications for that transition every month. And we will be using the beautiful work of ThinkStep and the survey analysis as a basis for looking. So we'll look at what you completed in that survey, look at the gaps that were identified then, and then be asking you for updated information about those requirements. So just feel free to connect in with the email info@climateleaderscoalition.org.nz, and we can start to pick up those conversations when you're ready, and are always available to answer questions that you might have as well. But a massive thank you to everyone. It's been really awesome to see the insights that have come through on the survey. Hand over to Kate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. And I do want to open up questions in a moment, but your comments really made me think of one of the key themes that really spoke to me from the survey results and indeed the snapshot this year, which is an observation that across the board, the long hike that is the low carbon transition is getting hard. You know, we're well down the path. Many of you will testify, you know, you've come a long way, but the going is tough. And those have been signatories for a while, indeed since the beginning. You know, a lot of you have done the hard work of getting your own house in order, looking very clearly at your scope 1 and 2 profiles, and indeed pick the low-hanging fruit. We heard Jolie Hodson, the convener of the coalition, this morning on Radio New Zealand talking about this. At least, you know, if you haven't already made those reductions, you have a clear plan to do that. And now you're getting to the pointy end of looking at your scope 3, working with your supply chain, looking at those gnarly little hard to abate parts of your emissions profile. And so kudos to all of you for that mahi, but also, you know, I think it's wonderful that this new statement reflects that new frontier of ambition and what is needed as we progress on that hike. So without further ado, I will open it up to questions. So again, do feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, raise your question to any of the speakers, or if you'd rather put it in the chat, please feel free to do that too. Hands. I have a question. I'm going to ask a question, but so while you all think about your questions, Barbara, I have a question for you. This is something that comes up all the time in my mind. you talked before and about sort of working with your employees to reduce emissions, and flexible working and working from home being a key emissions reduction tool for many of the signatories. That always raises the question in my mind about what about the emissions caused by that employee in their own home when they're using the power or the gas or whatever it might be. So I wondered, I mean, you probably deal with these kinds of issues all the time. Any thoughts or response you might have to that sort of an equation, and whether there's actually a net benefit in terms of emissions reduction working from home?
We have actually looked at that and quantified that, and that is coming out very, very soon. Can't share the numbers with you just yet, but there is a net benefit, even if just one day working from home. It all depends a little bit, of course, also on the transport distance that you save, and if you usually would walk to work, then well, working from home possibly wouldn't be that much of a saving. But yes, using a bit of additional electricity to heat your home would be taken into account. Also, you might use more video conferencing. Still, this is also taken into account because you might connect with your colleagues, not just over a chat at their desk, but you have more of a Teams call. So even taking those elements into account, there is a saving if you do work just even one day a week from home.
Good to know. Curiosity sated. Thank you, Barbara. Any other questions?
There's a question in here that you might actually be best placed to answer.
Okay,
Kate,
I'll do my very best.
which is from Adam Weller. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Which were the 2 CLC suggestions for the ERP? Oh, we've moved. Hold on 1 second, Adam. Which were not taken up by government, and what were some of the key items which were accepted by the government?
Putting me on the spot, Adam. I wish I could remember the 2 that weren't taken up off the top of my head, but I will fully admit that I can't. But some of the key ones that were taken up were around so the transport, so sectorally, the transport suggestions that we made, which will be of no surprises to any of you as members who've engaged with the work that we've done, including through our working groups, the Clean Car Accelerator, the Freight Project, etc. So we asked the government to be more ambitious on its on what it thought would be achievable in the freight sector, drawing on the work of SBC's low carbon freight pathway, and they took into account a lot of that work in the revised ERP that came out. We also asked them to, when they thought about the light fleet transition, rather than thinking about exclusively about a target date for phasing out ICE vehicles, to think about all of the things you need to wrap around, including around the private sector, to actually make those sorts of targets achievable, including, you know, where those vehicles are going to come from, and how you support different parts of society to get into those kinds of vehicles. We were very successful in the agriculture space, and Mike, if he's on the line, might want to come off and talk to this, but a group of SBC members who are also CLC signatories worked with Ministry for Primary Industries on a transformational joint kind of public-private investment in agriculture R&D, which Rachel mentioned earlier. And in the energy space as well, we were quite vocal about increased support for process heat conversions, which we Dita and helped us with some analysis on, and that, you know, in terms of a low-hanging fruit, your tons of CO2 equivalent saved per dollar is one of the easiest wins that we can get early on. So it was great to see significant scaling up of the Giddy Fund. But I'll have to come back to you on those 2 we missed out on. From memory, it was less about we're not going to do this, and more the ERP itself did not address it, and rather there were matters of detail that were going to be picked up in policy later. But I'll come back to you, Adam. I'll remind myself of those pieces and circle back by email. We have a few other comments coming through in the chat, which I'll pick up on. Jess from IAG writes, hello Jess, good morning. One of the key challenges I know companies have at the moment, especially around scope 3, is around data availability of different emissions factors for specific business activities, sectors, products and services, etc. Is CLC able to do any work in this space to support members? Would it be presumptuous to pass this to you, Megan?
It's a great question. I think the answer is yes, and it's just a question of timing in terms of being able to provide that support. I think I've heard recently from the Australian CLC, which Genesis grew out of this group, having been inspired by you guys, that they are doing some pretty incredible work in Scope 3 and have actually developed a tool themselves. So I think there's an opportunity to build a greater relationship with them. We're expecting that to be released next week. So utilising both our internal network and absolutely up for those conversations around developing a tool, but also other great work that's happening with similar coalitions globally would enable us to do that well too.
Yes, and I see. Thank you, Megan. That's a really great point. And it looks like the Australian CLC are doing some really impressive Scope 3 work. And also Jeremy Allen from ESP has put a helpful reminder in the chat of both ESP's Scope 3 emissions calculation tool, but also the fact that the signatories themselves, many of them are working on solutions that can help with Scope 3 and with other parts of the challenge. And I'd point you to the Climate Leaders Coalition website, which has a wonderful signatory a list of signatories that and the services that they offer. So have a look through that and see, because there are wonderful products and services amongst the signatories themselves. So we have another one coming through here from Jennifer Little. Hello, Jennifer, from New Zealand Post. What is the scope for CLC membership to grow for greater impact on emissions reduction and advocacy on government policy? Really good question. I mean, I think that we would absolutely love to see the Climate Leaders Coalition grow, and the fact that the broad size of it has stayed about the same, notwithstanding economic headwinds, notwithstanding COVID, notwithstanding the fact that that you've seen a significant ramp up in ambition of what the coalition is looking to achieve, is a statement in and of itself. And I think that comes through too in the snapshot with the commitment, double down on the commitment to invest in decarbonisation. But certainly it would be wonderful to increase the base, because the greater proportion of New Zealand's GDP and of our emissions that we represent, the more credibility we have as a voice to government. And so, yes, I mean, we would love to suggest a bring a friend approach. So if any of you are working with partners or stakeholders who you think could be possible signatories, please do send them our way. We're very happy to have a chat and talk about the benefits of signing up. All right, I've got another question in the chat, but feel free to put up your hand if you have one. I'm not seeing any hands up. Callum, I'm going to pass this one to you, Barbara, just a heads up. Callum McLean, hi Callum, how are you doing? With the data that you have, is it possible to calculate an implied abatement cost of the reductions members have achieved in aggregate? That's a curly one. I think I know the answer, but I think Barbara's more better placed to answer it than I am.
Well, I would say that it's really hard because we're not asking for any financial information in what have members invested or signatories invested in order to reduce. So I would say that we're lacking that bit of information to actually calculate the implied abatement cost, as in financial costs of reductions. Don't know if you have a...
Yeah. So I think, so last year we asked for, just a figure of what each signatory is investing and planning to invest in decarbonisation over the next 5 years, but it's not retrospective. It's not retrospective.
No, it's what are we planning to, but it's not related to what did the current what were the investment to achieve the reductions. So that's what you really need to calculate that thing.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we could, but we're conscious that the survey is already a pretty long, long exercise with lots of detailed questions. So we're probably loath to add to that exercise too much. Any further questions? I'm not seeing further questions in the chat. I'm just looking for hands up. No. Well, if there aren't any further questions on the snapshot, we can probably move to wind up, and even though we started a little bit late, give you all a few minutes of your morning back. I'll just make one final call for questions in case there are any. And thank you, Julia. Thanks to each of you, actually. I was going to thank the speakers, but what I will do first is, as Barbara did, thank all of you as signatories and all of those who couldn't make it this morning as well, for all of the input that you've provided, because we're very conscious that the survey is a big undertaking, and the intention certainly isn't that it is yet another compliance exercise, but rather, as I said at the outset, a really critical input to that transparency and accountability, and therefore the credibility that is so vital to the success of the coalition and to the power of its voice. So thanks to each of you for your input to that, and thank you too for your good grace and good humour as we've worked through some of the detail, because there certainly have been it has been a little bit of back and forth with some of you on that. So we're just a big thank you to each of you. You're all wonderful to work with. And I also just wanted to thank our speakers. So Barbara, thank you for giving up some of your ThinkStep ANZ team strategy day today to be here with us. Thank you, Rachel, for all your hard work that you do for CLC. Many of you don't see it, but behind the scenes, Rachel is a lot of putting together a lot of the press releases and a lot of the content that you see coming out from CLC, and to Megan for all your hard mahi on CLC to date and all that is to come. Thank you so very much. And I will leave you with that thanks, and also with a brief whakatauki. Ko te pai tawhiti whaia kia tata, ko te pai tata whakamaua ka tina. So that's seek out distant horizons and cherish those that you attain, which feels appropriate in this moment with CLC is stepping into the future with horizons that may at the moment feel slightly distant, but I think we can pause and cherish those we've already attained. So thank you all, ngā mihi nui, and go well, have a great day. Thank you.